Good morning. It's the 8th day of May, the darling buds of May, and it is a gorgeous day outside, or it's going to be. It's just clearing now, but it's quite warm. In fact, a lot of the school kids today are walking by with their elbows bare, their hats off, and enjoying the fact that they no longer have to struggle to school in the sleet and the snow and the wind. Oh, don't hold your breath. Let's take a look at the weather forecast. Actually, it's not bad. Just pulling your leg. It's going to hit 17 degrees today. Sunny intervals and light winds. And the afternoon. The afternoon is going to be a build-up to a brilliant few days ahead. At 2 o'clock, it's going to be 16 degrees, but no cloud whatsoever. Very, very sunny. And it's going to stay that way right throughout the evening, right throughout the night. No. We're not going to have sun in the middle of the night, but we're not going to have rain either. And leading into Thursday, 18 degrees and full sun. Friday, 20 degrees, full sun. Saturday, 21 degrees, full sun. Oh, I say, what a luxurious weather forecast we got ahead. Sunday, 21 degrees, full sun. Monday begins to cloud over again. We've got scattered showers. Scattered showers. Some of the sun left. Tuesday, not much of the sun left. But then Wednesday, we're going to go back to sky full of sun. Not a bad few days ahead. Not a bad few days at all. Reach for your sunglasses, reach for your summer clothes, and reach for the gin and tonic. Woo! Aha! And why not? Why not indeed? A nice gin and tonic on a hot, steaming day. I was telling somebody the other day, we were discussing various countries that we've been in. I stayed in a very, very posh hotel in New Delhi, the Indian capital. And you went beside the pool and pulled up what approximates a small golf flag. And that let the waiter know that you were ready to have a drink. And I pulled up the little flag and fell asleep. Woke up to find that my glass was still clutched in my hand and that the glass had been refilled with a nice lemon bobbing around on top. There, that was service for you. All without me knowing. Ooh. All without me knowing at all. Right, let's take a look. It's a mixed bag on the news front this morning. A mixed bag indeed. But the uproar in the domestics in the royal family continues, and there we have the king a bit busy to meet Harry. Just a little bit busy. Dear. Ooh. You got to hand out gongs to lollipop ladies, I guess. The Financial Times is the first paper up. Israel threatens a wider Rafah assault as mediators struggle to keep talks alive. No one story dominates Wednesday's front pages, but the FT leads on Israel threatening a wider assault on Rafah in southern Gaza. The main photo on the newspaper's front pages is of a meeting between French President Emmanuel Macron and his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, that was during a visit to, well, yes, what was it? Right. The Xi Jinping is visiting France, and the main photo on the newspaper's front page is of a meeting between French President Emmanuel Macron and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Right, and they were in the Pyrenees. Ooh, how very exotic. The Eye. UK gives Israel war crimes warning for Rafah invasion. Right. The Eye leads with reports that the UK government is warning Israel that it risks committing war crimes if it continues its offensive in Rafah without a credible plan in how to protect civilians. That is really getting to be a very messy situation in the Middle East. I think we were waiting for, as always, the truth to come out once hostilities cease. But I think one of the things that we are looking at there is we've forgotten who it was that crossed the border to start this whole thing. Some people suggest that the Israelis tempted Hamas into invading, and that the border that you couldn't cross with a fly, it's so tight, but which on that particular night let through a whole bunch of people who raped, plundered, and pillaged without seemingly any resistance whatsoever. However, this whole thing started with Hamas, and everybody seems to have forgotten that. Is the Israelis' response too heavy-handed? Well, that is a debatable point. But we've forgotten who started it. And this great flood of support for Hamas and Gaza that is roaring through our community needs to be treated with a certain amount of caution. There is never any right or wrong in a war, or for that matter, any hostilities. But people try to prejudge the facts without knowing what on earth it is that they're talking about. And that's where we need to be very, very careful in ascribing blame and where things started and how they started and why are they continuing in areas where they should have no right to continue. It's it's an unpopular thing to do, is to condemn what's happening in our universities and so on, but I condemn it. I don't think that this sort of uproar is a solution to anything. And it's about time that people got off the pot, got back to doing what they should be doing. And that is trying to better our society, not worsen it. And certainly not ascribing blame when they know sweet bugger all about it. That is uncivilized behavior. The Guardian. The Guardian turns to the Garrick Club members voting to lift a 193-year ban on women joining. Personally, I'm not terribly fond of the Garrick. I've had lunch there half a dozen times. I don't find it comfortable. I found my own club, the Travellers Club, comfortable, very pleasant, and spent quite a bit of time there. However, Travellers has got a similar ban on women. It's not a ban. Actually, the clubs were formed as gentlemen's clubs, clubs for men. They just haven't altered, as indeed many places have, to permit membership of ladies being on the premises at a time of club business. The Travellers, women can go into almost every room. They can indulge in almost all activities. What they can't do is they can't vote. And that's because the Articles of Incorporation started way back in the 1800s and by such luminaries as the Duke of the Iron Duke, the Duke of Wellington. I have to think about these things now, because whenever I start talking about something, and I shouldn't talk with a cup of coffee in my mouth, but I'm going to. Whenever we think about things that were started, they were started in the context of the late 1700s, early 1800s, when getting together in coffee rooms was popular, but not very practical. A lot of these clubs started then. Most of them have buckled to modern mores. The only thing is that everybody's lost the plot when it comes to some men like the company of men in an environment of men. It's got nothing to do with discrimination at all. And in fact, I don't want to go to the Women's Institute. And the Women's Institute most certainly do not want me. But I don't see that as discrimination. I don't get offended by it. And I don't understand why, if the legislation is in place to retain these differences, then we should. And as for being elite, yes, members are on a selected basis. Yes, they're mostly wealthy. I wasn't. But nobody challenged me on that basis, and nor did I expect to be challenged. But the one-time lady who ran the cocktail bar and was adored by every male member of the Travellers. We're talking about the Travellers now, not the Garrick. The lady who ran the bar once said to me, "Mr. Hayes, I come in from Southend. I come in on the train. I hear foul language. I see graffiti. I see ugliness around me all over the place, created by a certain segment of our society. So I walk into those doors and I walk into an environment of courtesy, civility, kindness, gentility, and," she said, "consideration. At the end of 8 hours, I walk out through the door back into a world that I don't particularly care for." And there's something to be said for that. So instead of condemning these places and getting on our high horse, I don't get on my high horse about it, but getting on our high horse about whether women should be let into some of these clubs or not, or whether men should be let into some of the women's clubs, for that matter. I think we should think, what do they create that is good and important to our society? Not saying that it's all hunky-dory, but in the debate, we don't think about these things anymore, and how sad that we don't. So anyway, the Garrick Club, and it's rather a nice building. The funny thing is that it was soot covered at one time, before they gave it a good cleaning. Once we got clean air in progress, and you can tell it because of its black walls in the short street that it's on. The Metro. Sorry, son, I'm a bit busy. The Metro reports that Prince Harry will not meet King Charles on a trip to the UK this week, as his father is too busy. Well, he's made his bed, and he'll now have to lie in it. Harry has been a very silly boy. Even if he's a bit upset with his father, a bit upset with the firm, the way that it's constituted at the moment, all he had to do was to keep his mouth shut and to work on change and reform from inside. And no time can be more open to reform and change than our present age. So, the Garrick. And the thing is that all the lovies have made issues of this. Stephen Fry, the Archbishop of Canterbury, all of whom have a particular view. But if they didn't like the fact that their club reflected those views, then get out. Now, in fairness, they've chosen a democratic process, and there's been a vote on the issue. But it's a major change. And I don't think that they've had a sufficient debate. And I think it's very sad, personally. I think it's very sad. Okay, the metro. Once again, we've been to the metro, the Daily Mail. Harry's reunion hope is dashed. As the prince flies into the UK, he's forced to admit his father is too busy with other priorities. The Mail says hopes of a reunion with his father have been dashed. Now, we assume that the Mail has got information that the rest of us don't have. I haven't actually seen any direct quote on Harry wanting a reunion with his father. So are we making a mole out of a new what is the phrase of saying? A molehill out of or a mountain out of a molehill. That's it. Yes, a mountain out of a molehill. Is that what we're doing? Creating a situation and then saying, "Oh dear, it isn't working." Could be. The Daily Express. Now, here's an interesting story. Myth that migrants boost the economy. And a Tory cabinet minister is saying it must be busted. The paper carries a photo of Prince Harry with a headline saying his father is too busy to see him. But back at headquarters it's headlines on senior Tories demanding Rishi Sunak scrap liberal immigration rules is suggesting that the old story is, oh gosh, yes, we get migrants and we get new ideas and new thoughts and new this and new that, and therefore the economy can't do without them. Is the Express is saying it's a myth that migrants boost economy. And that must be broken. Yeah. I'll take it if we did do, we'd have a park at the side there, would we? Normally there's one fan. The Times. Britain leads a charge to keep the young safe online. The Times has a story on how TikTok and Instagram will be told to tame aggressive algorithms pushing harmful content to children under new rules. It also has a photograph of Russian President Vladimir Putin as he arrives, as he starts a state visit, a royal visit. The relationship between social media and governments seems to me to be very tenuous. I think that governments are afraid of social media. And part of that fear is that they don't have, easily anyway, the right to get them thinking in a free way. Freedom of thought, the right to debate, not to just yell and protest. The Daily Telegraph, looking at children having to use social media. Uh, so the Daily Telegraph saying children must show ID to use social media. I think that's going a bit far, to be quite honest with you, and I doubt if it's practicable. But the Telegraph insists that there are plans to prevent under 13s using social media under new Ofcom checks. It also reports on UK airport chaos after e-gate systems failed. The Mirror. Extra time in the pub. Bars can stay open late if. I'm going to reach this later. Next. Well, we can get a good laugh out of the Star as usual. Oh no, butty boffins say. Bacon makes you stupid, even with brown sauce. And it's got a picture of a man licking his lips, looking at a triple-decker bacon sarnie. But, warns the headline, this sarnie will shrink your brain. Ooh. Okay. Well, it is a mixed bag, isn't it? And lots of things that need addressing and probably are halfway down the pecking list. But it's rather more meets the eye, so let's take a bit more depth. The Daily Telegraph leads with the proposed introduction of tougher age checks for users of sites such as Facebook and Instagram, and says the firms risk being fined if they fail to complete. The paper carries an article by Technology Secretary Jamie Yard-Ollis. I know that they're being well looked after, so I'm not totally concerned by this. The paper carries an article by Technology Secretary Michelle Donovan, in which she says the government will no longer tolerate a Wild West where children are force-fed violence and harmful online contents in an editorial. The Times questions how effective the policy will be, but it congratulates the government and the regulators for putting in place what it describes on the mast. Mostly thorough and balanced regime anywhere to tackle the issue. I didn't read that terribly well. The Times questions how effective the policy will be, but it congratulates the government and the regulators for putting in place what it describes as the most thorough and balanced regime anywhere to tackle and perhaps the Telegraph is right. The Eye reports that the firm at the centre of a cyber attack on the Ministry of Defence has contracts with several other government departments, as well as the Metropolitan Police. The Times says the company provided both the The Eye reports that the firm at the centre of a cyber attack on the Ministry of Defence has contracts with several other government departments, as well as the Metropolitan Police. But the Times says the company provides both the Home Office and the Cabinet Office with payroll and HR functions. According to the paper, Whitehall sources say there's no evidence to suggest that the suspected Chinese hackers have data from other departments. The Sun is one of the several papers to highlight a report from a think tank which claims that migration is to blame for almost 90% of housing shortfalls. The paper asks if politicians will ever wake up to the pressures caused by mass immigration. It also says too many MPs whine about property prices and then block all development. The Daily Express described the report by former Minister Robert Jenrick as hard-hitting. It quotes him as saying the government must undo what he calls the disastrous post-Brexit liberations, that he betrayed the wishes of the British public and had limitations on what he said. Right, okay, I think that covers, as it said, a multi-issue this morning. And I return to this business of Charles and Harry as the father refusing to see the son. Now, the son has been a pretty naughty boy when it comes to his family. He's used internal gossip to help his wife make a fortune. They've become temporarily number one celebrities in Hollywood as the prince and the lady, one of their own. And all in all, slagged off and got naughty with their family. Now the family is saying, at least the father is, the doyen, who just happens to be king of the country, is saying, listen, I'm not sure, Harry, that I really can have a conversation with you without losing my rag. Not putting words into Charles's mouth, but it must run something like that. And I can't say that I blame the royal family. Now, it's like a lot of things in our society. People have taken sides and become polarized. Yes, it's all Charles's fault because he's cold and he was a poor father and so on and so forth. Yes, we think that Charles and the royal family have been hard done by Camilla tittle-tattling to social columnist in the States. And making some private assertions about his father. There are problems in all families. God Almighty, even the most loving of wives sometimes said, I couldn't wait to get rid of the old man. He was becoming an absolute pest. Wanted me to find his socks for him, and so it's time to get out. But that doesn't mean to say that we should take things that seriously. But if they do, it's because they have the participants have taken things seriously themselves. So if Meghan and Harry didn't want to lead or live or handle their split from the family with the papers and media that they've identified as being theirs and more open to them and what they've done than the others, then he's got to take the consequences as well. It's a nasty, unseemly spat at the top. But one of the things that people ooh and ah about the royal family is their mystique, their mystery. And Charles has got to be very careful about how far he breaks down the barriers to let us in to his private world. I mean, one of those things that is I've come across because I've done a couple of royal tours is the royal family do not break wind. What an exceptional body they have. It must be divine right of kings. God must have given them such a body. No, it's that it's manufactured. No microphone is allowed to get within X number of feet of the royal family. And it's mostly so that if their tummy rumbles, it can't be heard. They are super people, superheroes. They drink a special form of alcoholic intake at the banquets that they attend and so on and so forth, so that they don't have to pee terribly often. The ladies wear lead in the hems of their skirts, so the wind will not blow up their dress and reveal what sort of knickers they're wearing. All this is done deliberately to try and make the head of state an interesting and intriguing figure. And so we mustn't try to break it down unless we want them to be like ordinary folk, in which case there will be no mystique, there will be no head of state, there will be no royal family, there will be no ooh-ah. A lot of people resent this, but you know, these are the things that come with the job. I am quite sure that Charles will say, oh no, I've got to go to another Boy Scout camp and taste a rabbit or a sausage cooked on an open fire when I would much rather get a decent bottle of wine and get pissed.
There's something wrong with the system.
And it's really not terribly nice of us to say, oh, well, they're snobs and this, that, and the other. Of course they are. But what's the definition of a snob? It really is somebody who simply is not interested in joining your circle. There's an Irish writer who actually is an American writer and who wrote a number of books in the States. Is called John O'Hara. And in a collection of short stories called Sermon and Soda Water, he addresses this issue of what's snobbery and what's not. And the story that he uses to demonstrate just how foolishly we look at these things is that one of his heroes is a journalist, but who has made friends with, and don't we all, a blue blood, a Boston blue blood. And the journalist, on one occasion when they're chatting, is going the popular route of, oh, your father, he's multi-millions and he belongs to a private club and so on. Very, very interesting that the issue of the Garrick has come up today. He belongs to a private club and all sorts of things that they do that means that they are snobbishness. And the blue blood holds his hands and says, hang on, he said. What is snobbishness? He said, I took you to my father's club. I introduced you to him. He was very interested in what you did. We spent a very interesting evening with he and some of his friends, chatting. And he enjoyed it as much as you did. And you had a very pleasant evening. But he said, you had no more desire to spend more evenings in my father's club than he had is to have you there for more evenings. He is used to those people with whom he's comfortable, with whom he shares ideas and thoughts, and is able to chat. And you, likewise, feel the same. And he said, you took me down to the press club. And you introduced me to some of your friends and colleagues. And they were all really quite uptight until you said I wrote for the Atlantic Monthly. That gave you entree into the world of media, the world of journalism, which really doesn't want many people, if any, from outside the profession in their social circles. Who's a snob? So before we start spraying things around about the royal family and the elitism and we should have a republicanism and they are nasty people, well, the only reason that they're nasty people is actually they're no more nasty than we are, or that we've got in our social circles. That because they are who they are, is their activities are highlighted. So if Harry has a go at his father, he is reported, and what he said comes out. If I have a go at my father, or uncle, or aunt, or whatever, is nobody gives a toss. Now, it's hardly the fault of my uncle, my aunt, or my father. We are what we are because of the usefulness that we have in the hive, the queen bee. You have workers, drones, who eventually is turfed out of the hive to make way for a younger, and who knows, in bee terms, perhaps a prettier wasp, or bee rather. Let's not mix up wasps with bees. We have to be very careful about these things. Have to be very careful indeed. It's easy to make a judgment. Now, we played episode 7 of our documentary. I'm going to replay it today because, particularly after a holiday, many people miss it. And I have many people say, "Oh, when are you going to play that documentary? We played it yesterday." Oh dear, I wasn't watching it at the time. So just until we get into our next phase of the morning's program, let's just very quickly take a look at the bloody past of a tiny town, episode 7, once again.
In the centre of Lewis is a war memorial, a monument to the dead of 2 world wars. It's the centre of the huge bonfire celebrations in Lewis on November the 5th. And of course, Remembrance Day services at various times of the year. But it also sits in the middle of an old square, which was surrounded by inns and hotels, the centre of social life in the town over almost 6 centuries. The White Hart we've already talked about, but the Crown and the Star both have fascinating histories. The Star Inn was a luxurious hotel used by royalty and gentry from the 14th century, when it was an inn owned by the Southover Priory. Parts of it are still there, disguised now as Lewis Town Hall. The inn was originally used to shelter pilgrims travelling to either Canterbury or Chichester, but it soon outgrew its clientele, and especially after the priory was torn down. In the 16th century, it started to get a reputation for its fine cuisine. By the mid-1600s, bishops and poets were praising it for its food and wine. There was, of course, the Black Spot in the time of Queen Anne, when the cellars were used as dungeons to hold some of the martyrs as prisoners, as they waited to be burned at the stake. By the mid-1700s, it was the scene of social gaiety. A monthly supper and ball were held each month throughout the winter, and the Prince Regent used it to hold dinner parties after attending the Lewes races. It is also said the Prince used it for other purposes, meeting young ladies there incognito, presumably for affairs of the heart. In the late 1800s, its clientele had changed, and it was the farm owners who held sway. Their weekly market luncheons were used for heavy social activity until eventually the premises were bought by Lewes Council. They turned it into a town hall late in the 19th century, and this it still is. But the changes have been considerable, and the present town hall is barely recognisable from the outside as the great inn which housed the social elite of Lewes. But the town hall is still a centre of social life, used for parties and dinner dances, and important civic events, such as the exhibition featuring the Rodin statue, The Kiss. Once banned from Lewes, but welcomed back with open arms for a brief stay. The Crown Hotel is almost next door and is still extant. Although it has struggled recently to achieve former glories, it was built in the reign of Charles I and was originally called the Black Lion. It changed its name to the Crown in 1790, and the Crown it has remained until this day. In its better years, it received visits from royalty, King George IV, and there is no suggestion that he was with a young lady. There's a little bit of modern history, though, to add to the Crown. When I first came to Lewes, there was a chap called Tony Burton here who befriended me. Tony took out the tenancy of the Crown Inn after a life of travelling around the world. He installed a grand piano in the bar area and played it to laughter and gaiety throughout the 80s, and he attracted a whole range of entertainers to join him. Those glory days have gone. Ownership of the Star Inn and of many properties around Lewes showed the power and the wealth of the Priory. When Henry VIII had the Priory pulled down, his hatchet man, Thomas Cromwell, grabbed a mansion house nearby, which had been owned by the Priory. But he didn't own it until his power had started to slip. Anne of Cleves led to the downfall of Thomas Cromwell from almost unprecedented heights of power. He was the king's favourite, and why not? He'd masterminded Henry's break with Rome. But he also masterminded his marriage to Anne. She turned out to be anything other than a beauty, and Henry never forgave his friend for arranging the marriage. The king had the marriage annulled after 6 months, on the grounds it had not been consummated. Anne's looks are historically the reason given for why the king couldn't make love to her. Cromwell took the blame, and as he slipped from power, his enemies closed in. He was eventually imprisoned in the Tower and beheaded. He added, in a distant sort of way, to the bloody Lewes tag. The executioner took 3 shots at trying to behead him. Anne of Cleves was granted this 15th century house, bearing her name in Lewes, when her marriage to Henry VIII was annulled in 1541. It was on the 16th of February 1538 that Lewes Priory was given to Thomas Cromwell, who was then Keeper of the Privy Seal. He immediately set about converting part of the prior's lodgings as a home for his son Gregory.
At the dissolution of the monasteries, Thomas Cromwell, who was Henry's chief advisor, had his beady eye on the land of Lewes Priory, as it was one of the richest and largest priories in the country. Now, he also wanted to set up a household in this area, and in fact his son Gregory lived in the what was latterly known as the Lord's Place across the road. It was the old prior's lodgings. But he certainly became Lord of the Manor of Southover when he got all the Lewes Priory lands off of the Priory. Well, the Priory was closed down and demolished, and they did a pretty good job of that by banging posts underneath the foundations and setting fire to them to bring that down. So, as I say, Cromwell's had this as part of his portfolio of properties. So he sent Holbein out to the famous picture of which we've got a copy out in the hall there, to do paintings of possible, which included Christine of Denmark, but also Anna Cleves and her sister. Henry liked the picture, so said, right, okay, we'll go ahead with it. You know, I suppose it was a bit of a like online dating in Tudor times. The painting was supposed to be a fairly good likeness of her. She has got fairly heavy eyelids. She tended to wear the heavy German style of clothes, which wasn't the sort of flighty sort of stuff, French stuff that Anne Boleyn and the likes would have worn. She was very pragmatic, in as much as she agreed to the annulment of the wedding, and because of that, and you know, I don't know, it's been a bit of a long, circuitous way of getting round to it. To answer your question, the house here became part of the annulment settlement.
Right.
The manor of Southover was one of 9 manors that she got in Sussex. She also, and by manor, we're not just talking about this house and the gardens around it. It's all the land that was providing for. So this was one of 9 manors in Sussex. She had another 9 in Essex. She was welcome at court. She got on well with Henry and Mary and Elizabeth, his 2 daughters, as well. She actually outlived all the other wives, and she's the only one buried in Westminster Abbey. At Anne's death, it reverted to the crown, and it went through a number of hands. Most notably was the Saxby family, who did a lot of the alterations to the house. So the original house would have been the footprint that you see from the road. So in fact, the bit that we've got now is the Iron Gallery and the Lewis Room was an old malt house. And eventually, Frank Verrill, who owned it, was on the council and was involved heavily with the Sussex Archaeological Society, presented it to the Society in 1925, and it's been a museum ever since then.
Not much later, in 1603, one of the oldest monuments to Lewis' life began existence. A local lawyer, John Rowe, gifted a piece of land to the town. It was much later that the town worthies decided to put it to use. They created Pell's Pool, a public swimming bath, drawing the water from the spring under the land. The water still comes from that source to this day. The cost of the project in the mid-1800s was £442, 5 shillings and 6pence, raised by public subscription. The name Pell's comes from an ancient word meaning pools. Again, it was the priory that influenced this development. There was a series of pools nearby before even the Romans came to Britain. The Normans transformed these pools into fish ponds, and the priory monks used them to rear swans, providing feathers for their quilts. They later drained the area to create water meadows, which included a paper mill. Locals would swim in the mill pond, and so a tradition of swimming was established in the area, resulting in the present-day swimming pool, the oldest freshwater swimming pool in Britain. But water has not always been a friend to Lewis. Whenever I have talked about attacks on Lewis, it has been either fire, wars, or plague. But there was one enemy which had formerly been a friend throughout its history: water. Back in a moment, but for once not a visit to the pub, but a reflection on the power of water. Lewis has always been subject to flooding, but the worst attack was in modern times, in fact, in the year 2000. The flooding was as serious as it was unexpected. 3 days of exceptionally heavy rain caused the River Ouse to spill over the top of its flood defences. Southover, the area near to the Priory, flooded first. But the worst of the deluge swept into the town centre at about 9 o'clock that night. I don't normally like to give what I call a shopping list of facts and figures, but the devastation was as severe as when the French raided the town in the 16th century. Almost 900 properties were flooded, over 500 vehicles were wrecked, and the total cost came to £90 million. More than 1,000 people were displaced. The town was cut in half for 3 days. But the true spirit of Louisians was put on show that night. Homes were opened to the displaced. Elbow grease took over, and the task of repairing the town began almost immediately. The long-term effects were felt for months, even years afterwards. Another bloody chapter in the history of the town. Lewis is a town of little theatre, opera companies, bands and musical societies. The people get on with entertaining themselves. So when cinema disappeared from the high street in 1961, it was barely noticed. Nostalgia, yes, but mourning, no.
Well, a little look back, reminder, but I have Philip Meredith lurking in the background somewhere. If he can, he appeared, disappeared, and I hope that he'll appear again. And a couple of things that are in the news this morning that I want to chat to him about. So, Philip, I know that you're there somewhere. Perhaps you'd care to join us. I'd like to. One of the things that has been very impressive about Philip is his family. What should I say? Makeup. He's got 3 children, all of whom are very successful, but all of whom are very, very pleasant children, apart from talented. And the family unit, I think, is so terribly important still. Good morning, Philip.
Yes, good morning, Anchorman. Reliving the floods.
Yes, I actually was just saying that I would like to talk to you about the fact that the royals are scrapping again, and that the family unit is so important, and that you've got a marvelous family unit. To what do you ascribe your success?
It's not my success, it's my wife's success. She's an absolutely wonderful mother. They all absolutely adore her.
But I don't think you should belittle yourself. They obviously adore you as well.
Well, I like to think so. I mean, I've had my moments with my first son, Charlie. He lived at home, not through his fault, but he lived at home for far too long. And there were flashpoints there because he's a very strong personality, like I am, for better or worse. But we are a close family. I don't bang the drum about it, but we're very blessed. Very blessed. This, I mean, how has this come to light, this business about the king being too busy to see his son?
Well, it would appear that a couple of the newspapers have, that they do have royal watchers who get the gossip where you and I wouldn't be able to get it. And this has Harry is apparently on the way or has arrived, and is not going to see his dad. And of course, then everybody says, "Oh, why is that?" And I forget which paper it is. I think there are two papers that have featured this story. The let's see.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I mean, I read it
The
on the
Daily
BBC.
Mail. Daily Mail says. Sorry.
I didn't want to put
The
you on
Daily
the
Mail
spot.
says Harry's reunion hope is dashed.
Right.
No, the Metro also says, "Sorry, son, I'm a bit busy."
Yes, well,
I think there is some interpretation.
that's the headline I saw. Yes. I mean, if Harry himself were to choose not to see Charles, that's one thing. Go ahead.
No, he can't. He's made his own bed, hasn't he?
Well, I think so, but there again, I do actually have a lot of sympathy for Harry. I have no time for his wife, who is the most brazen gold digger you can imagine. And that's all gone that's all gone pear-shaped for them both, because they are basically pariahs of their own making. But where I feel some sympathy for Harry is he was the younger of the brothers. He lost his mum at a terrible age because she was a devoted mother in the most tragic circumstances. And then, of course, he had to grow up finding out that his father had been playing away from home for years with the woman who is now Queen. And something I did read when he was last over is that, again, this could be just rumour and gossip, but apparently even now he can't bear to be in the same room as Camilla. And that must have contributed if that's true, that must have contributed, in my opinion, to Charles, if he has done, shut the door on his visit.
Yes.
It's love me, love my wife, and Her Majesty type thing. Well, I don't think Harry is able to do that, and I don't blame him on that score.
I must confess, is when the professionals, the real professionals, in the corridors of power get going, it's amazing what they can achieve. Because I have been a watcher of all sorts of things as a journalist, can remember when there was no way that he could marry her. And the public were quite adamant. Polls showed 70 or 80% people said no, they would never accept Camilla as his wife. Then he married her, and people started to say, "Oh, well, yes, she's not so bad, but she will never be queen."
Yes, I remember that.
And Charles was adamant that he wanted her as queen. And they managed to manipulate public opinion that went from no, we will never accept this woman as queen, to now she is greeted with great fervor wherever she goes. I mean, it is quite remarkable how they can manipulate the masses.
Yes, I think the bedrock of this is that there is a majority who do support the monarchy, and pretty much whatever they do eventually will be accepted. And we have to remember that the real outpouring of public feeling was about Diana. which made the monarchy look completely out of date. I mean, I remember the image I have of that time was as the funeral cortege went past Buckingham Palace, there was this picture, this image of all of the royals dressed completely in black, standing in a gateway together and giving the impression that they were so remote, so not with public opinion, and reacting too late. And that's my recollection of that time. So I think the popularity or not of the royal family at that point was probably the lowest it's ever been. But, you know, Charles never gave up on his now wife. He didn't even leave a respectful time after Diana's death. And even to this day, I've found it pretty unsavory.
Yes, me too.
Pretty unsavory, I'm afraid. So let me give you a silly analogy, okay? And bear with me, because this isn't as daft as it's going to sound, all right? 2 nights ago, Manchester United went to Selhurst Park and were thrashed 4-0 by Crystal Palace. You know, even half a season ago, unthinkable.
Yes.
You know,
that brought a smile to your face, I know.
I don't know why. But unthinkable, even earlier in the season. Palace were struggling. Roy Hodgson was at the end of his tether. Palace were underperforming, nearing relegation. United weren't doing much better, but at least they were in the European places. Well, how the worm has turned. But even though they played dreadfully and the players weren't fit for purpose, they were disgraceful and should have been ashamed of themselves, the away end, the United supporters, gave them a standing ovation off the pitch. Now, the point I'm making is those supporters are still deluded enough to believe that United are this great club, we're all wonderful, and we're all entitled, and this will all go away. So they weren't cheering those players because those players didn't deserve cheering. They were cheering the myth that is Manchester United. Now, my point is that it's the same with the monarchy. People worship the myth. They worship the status, the pomp, the ceremony. It almost wouldn't matter who was king, who was queen. To me, it's the monarchy, it's the institution that is holding the popularity, not the personnel. My opinion only, but that's the analogy I would draw.
Yes. I think it's a very good analogy. Yeah.
It's an almost blind faith.
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, just before you came on, I was saying that, you know, I've been on a couple of royal tours, limited royal tours, but in the briefing, you're told, particularly if you're carrying a microphone or anything that electronic, you mustn't get too close to the royals because they don't fart. Their tummy doesn't rumble. And there is no way that myth of being rather a superior human being is going to be broken by the secrets and the mystique coming out. And I was also saying that I was able to dig into how they can actually go to a banquet and apparently sit throughout the evening without peeing, and it's because they drink some form of drink, not their favorite drink, but made up of martini and so on, that doesn't actually circulate in their bodies anywhere near as fast as if they were having a gin and tonic or a glass of red wine. And so this whole mystique is, and also the lead weights are put into the bottoms of their skirts, so that the wind doesn't blow up and let us see what kind of knickers they're wearing. All these things are done to actually keep the image of this rather superior way of life going, and it's a very serious effort and exercise.
Well, it's certainly a very privileged life. Superior, I'm not so sure. I mean, at least some of them do work for the money. Very few, of course. There are very few working royals these days. It's aristocracy. I mean, it's aristocracy with bells on. We have to remember that less than 350 years ago, a monarch ruled under divine right. A monarch was deemed to be a demigod, if you like. And that's what was so horrific for the public at the time when Charles I was topped. Because that was regicide. That was a god being beheaded by a strict puritanical clique.
Yes.
Of course, in France, with the revolution, they had no such hesitations, because the monarchy to them was a sign of their repression and suppression. So they couldn't wait to chop off the head of any perceived aristocrat that they could find, including Louis and Marie Antoinette.
Yes, indeed.
Similarly with the revolution in Russia, the Bolsheviks had no compunction whatsoever in massacring the Romanovs for purely pragmatic and political reasons. Because had they let them live, they would always have been there as a figurehead, as a target for the Mensheviks and the Whites. So they just massacred them, chuck them down a well.
Yes.
So the Brits have always been much kinder to their monarchy, probably because of what you believe in, which is that it has to be a constitutional monarchy, which you believe in, don't you?
Yes, I do. I'm a great constitutional monarchist.
Yes. You see, to me, that's different from being a royalist. A constitutional monarchist like you, and I think I probably am the same. To me, if it has to exist, come the revolution, but if it has to exist, I'd rather it existed in the way you approve of than not. We can never go back to despotism. I mean, we just cannot.
No.
I don't accept they're any better than me. I also believe I'm much cleverer than most of them because most of them are thick as you know what.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, despite all that private education, the best they are pretty dense. Well, I think the classic example is that nightmare of an interview that Prince Andrew gave. Talk about an inability to think on your feet.
Yes. Yes.
We all know where his brains are, and they're not in his head. So I don't believe they're any better than anybody else, frankly, which is why I'm not a royalist. I'm not a royalist. And I think all this, I mean...
Tell me this, Philip. I mean, without us getting into a very deep philosophical argument, what would you put in place of the royals if we did away with them?
I would simply retain a prime minister, parliament, and possibly a president like the French, just as a balancer. And I would do away with the House of Lords. So I would have president, prime minister, and Commons, parliament.
Right.
That's what I would do.
Yeah, it's interesting. You see, my feeling is that the more layers of voting that you add on is that you weaken rather than strengthen your constitution.
No, I take that point. I do take that point, which is why I said maybe a president as well. But I don't see what's wrong with a government with a prime minister and an opposition in a one-chamber parliament. I don't see what's wrong with that.
No, I mean, as I say, I don't want to get into a deep argument, but I do think that checks and balances. I don't like the House of Lords the way it is at the moment. It's a nonsense. But I go back to Plato's Republic, where 3,000 years ago, he wrote that, in his opinion, the best form of government is a combination of a monarchy, an oligarchy, and a democracy, which is actually what we've got. The only thing is that the second level, the oligarchy, isn't really an oligarchy. It's stuff full of sycophants, and
that's the House of Lords.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
If you're gonna have democracy, for all its faults, do it properly. Why a so-called upper chamber, they still call it? Why? The people who are in there are, well, yes, there are many sycophants. There are many who are there because of money pumped into party funds. There are many in there. Well, I mean, for example, I love my cricket, as you know. But Lord Botham, the man won an Ashes series for us effectively in 1981. He's now Lord Botham. I don't get it. And none of it is elected. None of it is democratic. And that's what I find unacceptable.
Yes.
The lower chamber, the Commons, has its many, many faults. But everybody in there is an MP, not necessarily a prime minister, but is an MP because he or she has been elected. And that's the bedrock. I know we have a prime minister that was never elected, and nobody nobody wants anymore. I get that. But that's party politics.
Yeah, but actually, we must be aware of the system because nobody elects the Prime Minister except the people in his constituency. I don't get a chance to elect the Prime Minister. You don't, unless he actually is the MP for Arundel.
No, I get that point.
Yeah.
I get that point, and I would.
I think
be
that's a
voting...
strength, actually. I think that's a strength.
Yes, well,
is because basically what we do is we elect a pool of people who then choose their leader from amongst them.
Well, another analogy, a living analogy, is my old set of chambers.
Yeah.
They elect the head of chambers. If nobody wants to stand against Richard Barton, and people haven't wanted to do that because before he was ill, he was a marvellous head of chambers, then he just gets through if he wants to. But, you know, when I ceased to be what was then joint head of chambers, because the proprietor, John Collins, was still alive, there was an election. And 3 people stood from within chambers. And what happened? The John Major of Westgate Chambers was elected because all the other votes were split. And I'm not going to name him, but he was bloody useless.
Yes.
He was, I mean, I looked on from a distance and thought, my God, you know, the mistakes you are making. And he alienated the clerk's room, which is a big mistake. Boy. But anyway, that's democracy.
No. Yes, indeed. Changing the mood a little bit. What is your view of these councillors who are Muslim and are actually using it as their own particular form of pushing their faith into politics? I mean, I suppose we do that as Christians as well, but I do find it a worrying trend that the councillors are looking at all sorts of other things than the job that they're elected for. What's your view?
Yes, well, I don't know the nuts and bolts of what you are talking about. I know that councillors or not, there are groups of Muslims who are very keen on imposing the Sharia law. You see, this all comes back to what Harry's been talking about. Councillors or not, you have you're being upstaged all the time by you know who, by the way. What was I saying? Yeah, because Islam is such a fervent, devoted religion, and it's a very proactive religion, moderate or not, you're going to get more movement from them, the Muslims, than you are from the non-Muslims. I mean, Christianity is a dying breed. And I don't just mean church congregations. I mean,
Yes.
You know, we are living, as Harry has pointed out, although he doesn't live here anymore. In fact, I must ask Harry whether he's ever actually lived in England. I mean, joking, I mean, all he ever talks about is North America and France and a couple of other countries. But
we've been joined by Stuart. Good morning, Stuart.
Well, I know that. I've been watching him for the last 5 minutes.
He's just listening. Can I tell you? I have spent time under Sharia law, and to show you how that works is the journalists. This is in northern Nigeria, and in a town called Damaturu. And my journalist colleague said, "Mr. Keith, would you like to go for a drink this evening?" And I said, "Well, yes." So we'll pick you up. which they did. And Damaturu only has generated lights in its Market Street. The rest is pitch black. So they picked me up, and I was just vaguely aware of being driven in a Land Rover over some bumpy ground, going through some very, very dark gates, and then hiving up in front of a building with a flagpole in front of it. And we sat and had beers and very pleasant. And in fact, one spectacular thing was I sat through an African thunderstorm where the lightning leaps from cloud to cloud. It is quite spectacular. It doesn't go to the ground. But anyway, we had beers and a very, very nice evening. And away we went. And I said, that was very pleasant. Where were we? Is the police officer's mess.
Oh my goodness. Now that's very helpful. Listen, I'm from a generation of barristers. I go back this far, where the magistrates' court in London, Wells Street, for example, had a police bar. The upper level was a bar, a pub. And after the case had finished, if the police officer wanted to invite you for a drink, you went for a drink in the magistrate's court. It's unheard of now, but it wasn't only Wells Street.
Oh, yes. That's true of, the BBC were famous for clubs, but also when I worked for Reuters, the Viz News arm, they had a bar, and you would actually get your story ready and all your video, and you would give it to what was known as the cutter. The cutter was the editor, and you would give him instructions, and then you would say, if you need any more, call me in the bar. And you'd go upstairs to the bar, and there was a phone in the bar, and if they did need you, they would call you and say, I don't understand this bit, what do I do? And after that, other than that, you spend a couple of hours having a nice pint or two at lunchtime.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I've already told you one of my true Irish stories about the wedding I went to in this little village in County Wexford. One of my best mates in my original chambers, an Englishman of an Irish background, married a local barmaid off Fleet Street, who was very Irish and was from this village. Anyway, we get there, and it's the night before the wedding. No, sorry, it's the penultimate night. So we're in the pub, and the time goes on. We're having a wonderful time, and this is one of the reasons I have a problem with him. He's just constantly distracting me.
Yes, that's all right. Concentrate on the bar.
Yes, I wish I were there, actually. I'd enjoy myself. No, so we're in the pub and time's going on. Female landlady, very nice woman, but, force of nature, as you can imagine. Anyway, it gets to 11:30, which is long beyond closing time. And two guards turn up in full uniform and say to her, Annie, are you aware of the time? And she just said, will you feck off? It's Annie Murphy's wedding in a day or two, and these are her guests. And they did. They bobbed off. Half an hour later, they're back in civilian clothes, having a beer at like 1 a.m. The other one was, through a solicitor friend of mine, his girlfriend became great friends with my wife. Now, Renata was her name, and she came from County Dublin, a town called Hout, which is actually spelled Hawth, I think, but they pronounce it Hout. And her dad used the local pub in Hout a man called Pascal. He was 7 feet tall, I kid you not. He was 7 feet tall, and he always wore yellow clothes. So if you remember your Sesame Street, we all called him Big Bird. So Pascal was Big Bird. Anyway, he takes me into his local pub, and I'm amazed because it's the same building as the guard station. It's the same building. And then we're halfway through the evening, and this connecting door opens, and in come the police and have a drink. I mean, it's just so Irish. It's brilliant.
Yes. I had relatives in County Roscommon. When I was in Northern Ireland, I would go down and visit them from time to time. And they had a lovely pub, but they had a local solicitor who, if the Gardaí walked in after hours and caught them drinking illegally, and they were hauled in front of the magistrate, he would do a group rate, and he would defend the entire pub, and they would each pay a guinea.
No, that's good business. That's really good PR, Keith. Yeah, but coming back to the Muslim thing, of course they're going to punt their own agenda, because there's a vacuum. There's nobody in their way. And this is where Harry is so correct. Whether you call it PC, woke, whatever, it's created a vacuum because people are apprehensive. They are scared of standing up for our original values.
Yes, I know.
So these, whether they're Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, I don't know, but it is Muslims, yeah. They are fifth columnists. There's no doubt about it. And there's a vacuum, and you know what happens with a vacuum, Keith?
Yes, absolutely.
It gets filled because it's almost like a black hole. It sucks people in.
Yeah. And that's what's happening at the moment, I think, in the universities.
Well, my goodness me, that is. You can put the councillors to one side. You've got the universities here in France and in the States. I suspect that the least popular country at the moment amongst that generation is not Russia or North Korea or Syria, it's Israel. The problem is they keep linking it with anti-Semitism. This is what gets me. It isn't anti-Semitism. The fact they're Jewish is nothing to do with it. It's about the way Netanyahu is behaving.
Yeah.
And as Porges, Richard Porges, when he was on with the man in the background there, he said Netanyahu is hated in Israel. If he weren't in power, Richard said, he would be in prison.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. Yes.
No, I think there's a huge amount of truth in that.
Yes.
I mean, Richard Porges was a man who really knew his onions. He knew damn well what he was talking about. And look at the jobs he did. In the end, he was basically the assistant to the Secretary General of the UN.
Yes.
He knew exactly what he was talking about and about his own home country.
The most amusing thing I've ever come across is the Kosovars, for whom I have a reasonable regard, even though they're a bit of a mess politically, when you drove around Kosovo, you would see brand new mosques sitting on the edge of most towns. And my colleague said that when they first gained some form of independence as Kosovo, as opposed to part of Serbia, is the Saudis threw a hell of a lot of money in and offered to build brand new mosques. And every mayor across Kosovo said, "Oh yes, please," and sold them a piece of land on the outskirts of the town, took the money and kept the old mosque.
God. You know, there's nothing like a good bit of corruption, Mr. Keith.
No. Or Muslim having a go at Muslim.
Yeah, well, this is the point. They're not exactly a happy family, are they?
No, not exactly.
You know, the Sunnis and the Shias, and there are other branches as well. It's always and it's all about Muhammad's son or something. I mean, just extraordinary.
Yeah,
but you
absolutely.
know, they're a force to be reckoned with, and they're not going to go away.
No. Now, let's end our little chat by talking about something rather more pleasant, because it looks as if we're going to get, as of starting today, a really, really nice stretch of weather, which is going to last through till next Tuesday. So are we going to get is back to the day we went to Bangor and take our pails and our little spades and build sandcastles and so on, or what happens on a bank holiday or stretch of weather, nice weather now, Philip?
Well, I've just checked the weather forecast again, and you're right. It's from end of Monday, Tuesday next week that we get rain again, but
yes.
nothing too heavy. So yeah, we have a lovely stretch of weather. But the bank holidays passed. Inevitably, on the bank holiday, well, certainly here, it chucked it down all day.
Yes.
To the extent that you could hear it bashing against the windows. But at least that kept the grockles, the visitors, away from Arundel. Because bank holidays round here, if the weather is good, are a nightmare. I almost refuse to leave the house. I know that sounds pathetic, but we've got bikers on the Ford Road, we've got queues on the 27. Arundel itself is a log jam. People can't park. It's full of visitors who just completely mob the pavements. It's a pain. So, but yeah, it's a working week, and the kids are back at school. My wife's back at work, so it's just the weekend that can be enjoyed. Actually, my wife is singing with her local choral society at the Albert Hall on Sunday.
Ah, there we go, the talented family.
Yeah, there's a multi-choir event at the Albert Hall, and most of the choral society, the Aaron Choral Society, are being coached up, bussed up. They'll rehearse, they'll then have a nice lunch, and then there'll be the concert. The downside is she won't get back till like midnight, by which time I'm afraid I'll be in the land of Nod. Right, well, it's 1:45. I'm going to let Stuart loose on you now.
Very nice. We'll actually probably take a little break while we get hold of his guests.
I mean, I have got somebody coming round, a workman coming round shortly, so I need to go anyway, Keith.
Yes. Well, thank you for joining me, Philip. As usual, a good chat. Is for some reason when we have a bank holiday on a Monday, everybody stays in sort of semi-holiday mood for 3 or 4 days. So getting back to normality takes time.
Yeah, I don't like bank holidays, Keith, to be honest. I don't like, because nothing happens. You know,
no, that's right.
And because it's a bank holiday, there's no banking done. It knocks out the direct debits and the standing orders. It's bloody annoying, right. Actually.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
your budget gets knocked out of kilter.
Well,
You're
it does.
absolutely
I mean,
right.
like when I went back online, yesterday, Tuesday, a direct debit had come out that should have come out at the weekend that I'd forgotten about, and I was within that much of an overdraft. So
Yes.
it's very, very annoying. You've got to think ahead.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm not a fan of long weekends, particularly now I'm retired, because there's no difference. I'd
Yeah.
rather have something to do than
Yes.
just faff around on a bank holiday. But there we are. Easy for me to say because I'm not working anymore.
Philip, thank you for joining me, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Ian's here.
Well, if you want me on tomorrow, just send me a text. I'll see you.
Yes, I will.
And I
Okay.
can't do Friday. Please remember.
No, Friday I've got you out. I've got angry people banging on the doors saying, "Why isn't he there?" But other than
Yeah,
that,
of course you have. Yeah. You old tart. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ian.
Always good value for money. Philip. And now we're going to take a short break, and then Philip, Stuart Dolby will be here with his guest. So back at around about 10 o'clock. Toodle pip.
Here we are.